everybody. I am so glad you're here. I have been looking forward to this event for a long time now, and I hope you have been too. If we haven't gotten a chance to meet yet, my name is Anna, and I am a writer of biblical fiction. Now, one of my friends said to me just this last week, biblical fiction, that sounds a little bit like an oxymoron because biblical is real stuff and fiction is not real stuff. But what I like to do is I like to stir spiritual appetites of my readers with characters of scripture. And you know how in scripture sometimes there's just a little snippet of what that person's life is like. So I always ask myself, what else happened in their life? And I kind of build those fictional things around. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. For now, I want to talk to you about my presentation, Ain't No Dress Rehearsal, Create Intentional Legacy. When I think of building my legacy, I immediately think of family. I don't know if you do too. And then the way that my mind works, I then go to Irma Bombeck. And not that Irma Bombeck and I are related in any way, but Irma had a great way of talking about suburban home life. She was a humor columnist. She wrote for more than 30 years. She ended up with many bestsellers. In fact, I have a couple of her books in my collection. And she had a way of kind of hitting you between the eyes with so much realism and so much applicability that you couldn't help but like her. Here's just a few examples of her quotes. Take this first one, for example. It goes without saying that you should never have more children than you have car windows. And then there's another one about mealtime, in particular Thanksgiving. She says, Thanksgiving dinners take 18 hours to prepare. They are consumed in 12 minutes. Football halftimes take 12 minutes. This is not a coincidence. Or this one about children owning up. She says, have you any idea how many children it takes to turn off one light in the kitchen? 3. 1 to say, what light? And 2 more to say, I didn't turn it on. You know, as funny as she was, she also had a beautiful sentimental side. And I think it's very clearly displayed here in her quote about family. She said, we were a strange little band of characters, trudging through life, sharing diseases and toothpaste, coveting one another's desserts, hiding shampoo, borrowing money, locking each other out of our rooms, inflicting pain and kissing to heal it in the same instant, laughing, loving, defending, and trying to figure out the common thread that bound us all together. Does any of that kind of hit home with you? When I read her, I just see my own family in her writing. So when I think about if I were to ever write a memoir the way that Irma Bombeck did, I might call it Growing Up in Mayberry. And I don't know if you remember this show or if you were even around for this show, but it was a hugely popular sitcom in the 60s. It was called The Andy Griffith Show. And I know even as I'm saying that, I'm really dating myself. In fact, today's reader may not even know what the fictional town of Mayberry was even about. But it really represents what my family was like, what my town was like. It was just a simple place, and it was a small town in the Midwest. Life wasn't perfect, but we really had everything that we needed. As you can see from the picture, I'm from a large family. I'm one of 6 kids, and so we never were lonely. I can remember even doing things like a vacation for us might be a week in a camper somewhere in our state alongside of a lake. And we would always go to church together, no matter if it was a totally foreign town to us or not. And as large as my family was, these small town churches were always excited to see us coming because we would fill up a whole pew and we might be half of the congregation. And I have so many fond memories of that. I also have a hugely fond memory of the prayer life and the devotional life of both my mom and my dad. Now, given that it always was, I figured it was this way for all families. And I think looking back, I probably kind of took it for granted a little bit. But you could find my dad, if you rose early enough, You could find him in the living room any weekday morning, very early, in his recliner. He'd have his Bible up beside him on the end table. He'd have maybe a notebook. He'd have his glasses out, and he would either be reading from the Word, he might be taking notes, or he'd be praying. But you knew not to bother him because that was his special time. Likewise, in the evening, my mom would always prepare dinner, and it would probably be something simple, but it would be something that would be filling. And she'd assign who was cleaning the kitchen, and she would go off to her bedroom, which is kind of her sanctuary. And she would use her bed almost like an altar, and she would have her Bible out and notes, and she would be praying. And again, we knew not to bother her during that time because that was her special time. And I always grew up with the phrase or the saying, the family that prays together stays together. You might have heard that phrase as well. And so it never dawned on me that family would ever be anything but together. So imagine the jolt of bewilderment that ran through me when I found myself in my own marriage that had completely unraveled. I was in my early 30s. I had two small children, and I had no idea how life had gone so terribly wrong. I remember being completely devastated and not knowing what to do, but knowing that I needed to go home. And home at the time was actually several states away from where I was living. So I packed up the kids. Actually, my mom and dad came down and helped me pack everything up. And we all went back to my home state. And, I don't know why I thought this, but because of what I had been through, and it was pretty tumultuous. What I had been through, I kind of felt like I had earned the right to feel sorry for myself. I kind of felt like I earned the right for other people to feel sorry for me. And I kind of figured that my parents would kind of go along with that. And again, I have no idea why I thought they would do that because they raised me to be a very strong person, someone who didn't feel sorry for themselves. But at the time, I just thought I had earned it. So we got home, and I think I had been home. I know I had been home for a day. Maybe we were into the second day, and I was taking full advantage of not having any responsibilities. And I was crying at the drop of a hat, and I was laying on the couch a lot, and I was sleeping a lot. And long about the second day, about midday, my mom said, "Hey, I have an idea. How about let's us take the kids? I know of a play place. It was in a fast food restaurant, and they can play, we can eat, you and I can talk." And so I thought that sounded great. So that's what we did. And we no sooner sat down and the kids were off playing, where I started in on my mom about how terrible this was. And, oh, I just can't believe this is even happening. And I feel like such a loser. And she let me go on for about 30 seconds before she really kind of hit me right between the eyes with a phrase that I'll never forget. And she said, "They take their cues from you." And you could have knocked me over with a feather. Of course, what she was talking about was my kids would take their cues from me. And she went on to explain that if I was going to act like this was something that was impossible to overcome, my kids were going to feel the exact same way. And I was actually going to teach them to project onto other people and to not take ownership for their own health and their own well-being. Well, that was the last thing that I wanted for my kids. I wanted the very best for my kids. I wanted my kids to have the trust that I had in my own parents. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, wait a minute, this ain't no dress rehearsal. This is real life. And I'm the adult here. And these kids are depending on me. So with that realization, I decided, and I probably didn't call it legacy at the time, but I decided that I was going to take ownership of what happened to me and what happened to my children. And I was going to build this legacy with intent. After all, it was probably past time that I learned that. So I probably didn't even think about this at the time. It took about 3 years, I would say, from the time that I originally separated to the time that we moved through the divorce, and to the time that I felt like we were really on some solid footing again, about a 3-year period total. And when I began to build this legacy, again, I didn't think of it at the time, but now looking back, I realize I took 5 very significant, very thoughtful, very intentional steps to build that legacy. And those are the things that we're going to talk about today. The first thing is something that we really kind of already talked about when I told my story. And that's the realization that you're building your legacy right now. You may not be intentionally building it. You may be like me, where you feel like you're kind of justified in blaming somebody else for something that's happened to you, or you kind of feel like you've earned the right to feel sorry for yourself because, doggone it, you've been through something really tough. But legacy is occurring whether you realize it or not. So my question for you today is, do you choose to be passive, or do you choose to be intentional in building your legacy? Step number 2 has to do with defining your legacy. What kind of importance do you want to place on it? What kind of legacy do you want to create? When it boils down to it, what does the idea of building legacy mean to you? That's kind of the big picture. So the next slide goes into kind of boiling that down into the essential elements. What things are important to you in building legacy? What things are important to those in your life? What would honor your values, your passion, your wiring? Let's try to incorporate all those things into the essential elements of building your legacy. I kind of thought of a question that I thought very nicely boils down or crystallizes what it is that we're trying to get to. If you could kind of picture yourself at the end of your life and you're looking back to where you are right now, what would make your future self proud to see? What would you be thinking and planning now? What steps would you be putting into action right now that would make your future self smile? If it helps, I'll give you some of the things that I came up with when I had my wake up call with my mother. The first thing that I decided was that I didn't want to live with regrets. And what I mean by that is I decided that I was going to be in the moment. I wasn't going to be fretting over the past. I wasn't going to be longing for the future. I was going to be in the moment where I was right now, laughing with my kids, crying with my kids, helping them learn, and just really taking advantage of the area and taking advantage of family time and church time and all that kind of thing. If I did something wrong, I was going to say that I was sorry. And so that we could actually learn to restore that relationship. I had committed that I was going to do the right thing, even when it would have been easier to do the wrong thing, even if nobody was looking. And I was going to keep the door of reconciliation open with my spouse until that divorce was final. And what I mean by that is I was going to respect him in every interaction. And I was going to respect him when it came to talking with the kids. I wasn't going to badmouth him or anything like that. And to me, that meant no regrets. Another thing that I had decided to do is to create an all for one for all culture with my kids. So we were going to do lots of things together. If there was studying to be done, we were going to do it together. I was going to teach them the value of family. I was going to teach them the value of siblings. And I was going to tell them not to take that lightly, but to handle that very carefully and lovingly. And I was going to raise them in such a way that they were content with what they had. If we got something extra, then that was phenomenal, but it wasn't something that we were going to expect. And above all, I determined that Christ would be the very center of our home. Now, I could go on with you for hours of all the ways God was there for me during this time. It was amazing how many things that he did to make sure that we had everything that we needed. But I do remember several months into the separation, me being very worried about money. it was to the point where I was wondering how we were even going to afford gas in the car for the rest of the week. And this was long about Tuesday or Wednesday of the week. And I was working with child support and trying to get some child support started. And I was just running into roadblocks. And it was to the point where I didn't even feel like I wanted to be at work. It was about lunchtime. So I took what little gas I had in the car and I did drive out out for lunch. And I just remember sobbing and praying and saying, Lord, I can't even see you right now. I can't see any evidence of action in your life, which I'm sure made him chuckle because he had given me so many things at that point. But at that moment in time, I was at the end of my rope and I said, I can't see you. I can't feel you. I need to feel your loving arms around me and I can't feel it right now. And I can't hear you. I don't know what direction you have for me. Will you do something miraculously to help me to know that you have a plan and a purpose for my life? And I ended up driving back to work and finishing out the day and didn't really think much more about the prayer at that time. But the next morning, after I had dropped my kids off to school and I was on my own way to work, I turned to the radio station on, which was a very normal custom to me. I listened to a Christian radio station, and the radio personality had this way about him. And he would pray for his listeners every morning. And he would say, if you're driving, make sure that you put your hands on 10 and 2 and keep your eyes open and on the road. But I'm going to pray for you now. And he was praying along. He got in the middle of the prayer and he said, Lord, I'm just feeling an impression from you that there's someone who's listening right now who doesn't think they can see you. They don't think they can feel you. And they don't think they can hear you. But you're telling them that you have a plan and a purpose for their life. And it was just miraculous to me. You know how God is. He just has a way of winking at you. He just has a way of kissing you and saying, I'm here for you. I hear you. I see you. And I have a plan and a purpose for your life. That moment took me from feeling like, man, God is all I have, to God is all I need. And as I continued this journey with him, he helped me to understand that he was all I wanted. The next step in the process is taking stock. What kind of resources do you have? What skills do you have? What strengths? What education? What networking do you have? I was asking myself all these questions because here I was back in my home state again. I was needing to find a job that was going to support myself and my kids. And so I needed to get out there and be resourceful. And these types of things helped me with that. I also had tremendous family and friend support. I could go on for another days really of all the ways that my parents and my siblings were there for me. I can remember one sister coming forward and saying, I don't want you to worry about the kids. I can take them before and after school so that you can get settled in your job and you don't have to worry about childcare at this point or anything like that. I can think of another sister who gave us bunk beds for the kids. I can think of another sister who bought me a winter coat. I mean, I could just go on and on of the ways that my family were there to support me. Another thing that you might want to think about is what assets you have, what budgets you have. For me, we had a very reliable, although older car. It was a great big gold Buick, and we called her Lady Luck. And during that whole 3-year process, from the separation to the divorce to the time that we felt like we were on solid footing, I don't think once that car ever gave out on us. It was there and it helped us all the way through. Another thing is we took a budget and we were very, very careful with our budget to make sure that we wouldn't go over. And it was amazing the blessings that God brought to us. Number one, our church. We had a very vibrant church that we attended. And programs were going on all the time. And I remember one week in particular just being exhausted long about Thursday evening and saying to the kids, wow, I am so glad we're home tonight, because we had been at church every single night that week at all different activities. But just the beauty of having that and having that community was amazing. We also took advantage of the natural beauty of the parks in our area. We have parks, we have lakes, we have sand, we have trails, and we just took advantage of all of it. And you didn't need money to do that. You just needed each other. The next step and the final step in the process is measuring your success. So find those measurable indications to help you know that the legacy that you're creating is actually turning out as you intended. If it's not, you can always make adjustments, but it's always important to investigate that. How will you know when you're making real progress on that journey toward building intentional legacy? I have a couple of things that had happened to me. One of the things, and it's just so amazing. I created this little photo album, and at the time, scrapbooking was all the rage. And if you could really see this photo album, first of all, it's so fun for me to look at and see these little kids that were entrusted to me to raise. But, I did not even have money for stickers. I'm noticing that as I look through it. I had colored paper and I had markers. And other than that, we were just creative with it. I made my own, instead of having stickers, I made all of my own little graphics by hand. But this page in particular, I think is really, really meaningful to me. And it's a scripture that I clung to the entire time that I was going through this process. And it's actually Proverbs 31. Now, you might think that's kind of strange, because here I was, a single woman now, and I'm focusing on the scripture that talks about a wife of noble character who can find. But you know what? I had my kids. And if this is important for a wife to have, it's certainly important for a mother to have too. So in this scrapbook, I wrote out between verses 10 and 25 of Proverbs 31. And it starts out, a wife of noble character who can find? She is worth more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with her hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still dark and provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. She considers the fields and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sends about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand, she holds the distaff and grabs the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. And then just one little note for my kids at the bottom. I say, this is my goal that has not yet been achieved. Prayer will help. I love you. It is my greatest pleasure to be your mother. And who knew all these years later that I would be able to share that with you today? The other thing that I learned during this process was the real meaning of forgiveness. Up until this point, I thought that forgiving someone was saying, okay, I know you hurt me. In fact, maybe you hurt me terribly bad, but it doesn't matter. I lived that way for years, believing that. And I didn't realize that I was actually sabotaging my attempts at healing and having this belief. I kind of wonder where I'd be if I had had a little bit more healthy realization about forgiveness. But I'm glad I figured it out when I did. I realized that forgiveness really meant my deciding not to hold an offense against another person anymore. I also learned that forgiving someone doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship will be restored. The lack of restoration does not mean that the forgiveness didn't take. Restoration is one thing, forgiveness is another, and sometimes restoration follows, and sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, just to encapsulate those 5 steps once again, I wanted to remind you that the 5 steps are realization that building your legacy is happening, whether you realize it or not. The defining what legacy means to you would be step number 2. And then step number 3 is boiling that definition down into the essential elements. Step number 4 is taking stock of your resources. And step number 5 is finding ways to measure success. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this time. It has been really meaningful to me. It's done me good to remember all the ways that God was there for me. And just in our last couple minutes, I wanted to let you know, while I have you here, about my book, which coincidentally is also called Legacy. It is due to be out March of 2023. So I would be thrilled if you would buy a copy, if you would do a review of it, and if you would tell all your friends about it. In order to find out about it, my next slide will tell you about my website, and I would love for you to join it. It's annamoorebradfield.com, and you can find out there not only about Legacy, but any other works I have in process. And as a thank you for joining that site, I have created a short story called Overshadowed, and it'll be a great introduction for you, or a backstory of the antagonist of the story Legacy. So I have lots of book ideas in my head, so I would love for you to join me. Again, just thank you for this time. It's been so meaningful to me, and I hope it's ministered to you. Until next time, have a great day.